A blood-red sunset stretched across the western sky, darkening the Charlotte skyline with a somber hue like the sigh of the earth. And Eleanor Whitaker, 76 years old, stood motionless on the balcony of a majestic two-story house perched on a hilltop, where potted hydrangeas still stood proudly, despite the knock on the door of autumn. Once the Hawkeye CFO of Piedmont Properties, the corporation that transformed a sleepy town into a bustling metropolis, I was accustomed to seeing things from above. But now that view was just a vast, cold void. 15 years since George left this world, this house had become my fortress of peace, and also a golden cage that hid my deep loneliness. No, I would not allow myself to be weak. I was Eleanor Whitaker, tough, independent, and always in control, even when the shadow of death was looming. "The sun is almost down," I whispered, my hand lightly brushed the wrought iron railing, cold and silent like frozen memories. In the distance, the city began to light up, twinkling like stars falling to the ground, silently. People looked at me, only to see a lonely old woman watching the sunset. Little did they know, every last ray of sunlight this day carried a very high price. I closed my eyes, letting the wind blow through my silver hair, the cold seeping into every strand, a familiar feeling as if it had been with me all my life. Don't lose control, never. That whisper, like a vow engraved in my heart, echoed in the quiet space. Only I heard, and only I understood. A sudden autumn wind blew, stirring the late-season hydrangeas. I opened my eyes and stared at the red sun slowly disappearing over the horizon. Decades ago, the sunset had been as bright as today, but to me, it was the promise of a new beginning, of a brighter tomorrow, not a sign of an impending end. George had whispered, "Look, baby, this city will be ours." And we had made that promise come true, brick by brick, contract by contract, number by number. But now, the city was still there, still rising, but George was gone, and I was fading, like the sunset fading away in the sky. I turned and walked inside, touching the empty vastness of the house. Beautiful, brilliant, but lacking warmth. Each room was a compartment containing memories, pieces of the life that I had painstakingly built. The picture of George, with a bright smile, lying on the table next to the fireplace seemed to be watching me. That smile had been the torch that guided me through all the thorns. He was the only one who truly saw the real me, both the wild desires and the deep fears I never dared to. George never judged my toughness. He just quietly nurtured the parts I had lost, filling the void that I myself did not recognize. But he left too soon, leaving me teetering at the peak of my career, embracing a powerful empire with no one to share it with. I walked towards the large window where the backyard garden quietly appeared, where the hydrangeas still defied time. They were beautiful and sturdy, like me. But could anyone see that beauty behind this cold steel shell? Could anyone really understand the loneliness of a woman who devoted her life to creating and controlling, only to realize that she had unintentionally missed out on the most important things? That question lingered in my mind like a ghost, a nameless obsession. I used to control everything, finances, career, emotions, but there were things, like family, like human connection, that I could never control. I used to believe that control was the key to peace, but now it became a cold wall that separated me from the world, pushing me down into the abyss of loneliness. And now, with the doctor's chilling conclusion, I knew I didn't have much time to patch things up or make things right. Every moment was a reminder of the finiteness of life, of the things I had not said or done. The last of the twilight was fading, and I felt a strong urge to do something, to leave a mark, not in numbers or buildings, but in something deeper, more lasting, something that would survive even when I was dust. The smell of engine oil and the sound of hammers hitting steel. That was the soundtrack of my childhood, echoing through a small house quietly located on the outskirts of Charlotte. My father, a diligent auto mechanic, would come home every afternoon as a familiar sight. His clothes were covered in oil, his hands were calloused from work, but his eyes would always light up when he saw me. My mother, who worked at a grocery store, would often come home exhausted, the numbers in her ledger and the worries about food and clothing forever etched on her face. I looked at them, at the poverty that silently clung to my family, and I knew I had to find a way out. I swore to myself that I would never let my children experience what I had endured. Ellie, girl, stop staring at those books. Come help me clean the house, my mother said softly, her voice weary as if she were carrying the weight of the world. I was 15 then, looking up from my old ledger, where the numbers danced like spider webs, tangled and mesmerizing. Mom, I was trying to figure out if I could save another $10 this month. My mother just shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand my strange fascination with numbers, my desire to control my finances, my life. But I'd community college accounting. It was the only door I saw that lit up in the darkness of lack and uncertainty. I threw myself into my studies like a moth seeking light, going to class during the day and working part-time at the school library at night. The smell of old paper, the soft sound of pages turning, and each dry accounting lecture became the only support I had. I studied with a fierce hunger. Not hunger for food, but hunger for freedom. Hunger to live a life not imprisoned by poverty. Every night, when the dormitory lights were turned off, I still sat there at the rickety table, the flickering desk lamp illuminating the dry financial formulas. I knew every problem I solved, every page I read, was a step closer to the life I longed for. When I was 30, a fateful turn occurred. Piedmont Properties, an emerging real estate company, caught my eye like a rough diamond, hiding huge potential in abandoned land and ambitious plans. The owner, an old, strict man with a timeless vision, recognized in me a fire, a will that few people possess. You have the eyes of a money reader, Miss Whitaker. No one here sees numbers like you do, he said in a husky voice, his eyes piercing like a knife. I nodded, my face expressionless. I understood. It was a compliment, rare and valuable. Over the next 15 years, I climbed the ladder, from an unnoticed accountant to CFO. I dove into every deal, every contract, not missing a single detail. I reveled in the dense reports where I found weaknesses, analyzed cash flows, and optimized profits with cold precision. She's a hawk. She doesn't miss a number, I heard a coworker whisper in the company kitchen. Another chuckled. I bet she knows my bank balance. I heard it all and just smiled faintly. Hawk? Fine. Hawks never go hungry. Under my leadership, the company grew from a small office to a real estate empire that reshaped the face of Charlotte. The skyscrapers and the model neighborhoods were all imprinted with the numbers I had calculated. I was proud. I had broken the chains of poverty and built a solid foundation. I had become Eleanor Whitaker, a respected name in the financial world. But the price of that success was countless hours of hard work, late-night meetings, and a heart that gradually became cold and drained of normal human emotions. I had sacrificed relationships, holidays, and moments of peace for the position I held. At the time, I believed it was a worthy trade-off. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I looked at the clock. 10 o'clock. Nathan. A familiar feeling settled over me. a mix of anxiety and exhaustion creeping quietly into my chest. George usually only called at this hour when there was an emergency involving the boy. What's wrong with Nathan? I picked up the phone, my voice dry, unable to hide my coldness and urgency. On the other end of the line, George sighed, a heavy, mournful sigh, a sound I had become all too familiar with. Eleanor, I know you're busy, but Nathan, he's got a fever. Can you come home? He keeps calling for his mother. His voice was filled with helplessness and longing, like a man trying to hold on to the last thing he had left. I looked down at the pile of documents on the table, $1 million contract awaiting signature, a crucial deal that I needed to decide that night. I was 38 when Nathan was born, an age when many people have children preparing for college, and I was at the peak of my career, my mind and energy focused on numbers and strategy. I loved him, of course. Motherhood is instinct, but that love was often swallowed up by work. Pushed into the dark corner, George was the one who took care of the child more. He held him, rocked him to sleep, and comforted him when he was sick. He was the one who witnessed his first steps, his first words. He was the one who stood in the audience, clapping and cheering during school performances, while I was absorbed in the 33rd floor conference room. George, you know I can't, I said, my voice soft and apologetic. This contract is important. Take him to the doctor. Just pay for it from my account. There was a cold click on the other end. George had hung up. I closed my eyes, a wave of regret passing through me, as thin as a breeze, and then it was drowned out by the pressure of work that weighed like a stone. It had to be this way, Eleanor. This is my responsibility. No one else can do this. I told myself, trying to calm myself, ignoring the faint call of conscience in the back of my mind, and then the distance began to crack like a crack in glass, and it grew over the. By the time Nathan turned 15, a time of bravado and self-assertion, the gap had become a chasm. One fateful evening, I came home to find his room empty. My heart was pounding. I had forbidden him from going to the rock concert he had been begging for all week, but now the torn ticket lay alone on his desk, a silent challenge. Nathan, where are you? I almost screamed as the door swung open and he walked into the house, his face uncaring. I'm going to the concert, he replied calmly, his deep blue eyes fixed on me without wavering. I told you, Mom. I stood there frozen, still clutching the torn ticket. Anger rose up like a wave over a dike. I know you forbid me to go. Why are you deliberately resisting? I tried to keep my voice calm, but anger burned in my heart. Remember my elementary school graduation? You promised to come, but then you skipped it because of an important meeting. I want freedom. I want to live my life my way. I'm not a project for you to run. The boy ran back to his room and slammed the door. The bang echoed like a final bell. I stood there, my heart squeezed by the sharp words. Don't you understand, Nathan? I did everything for you. I just wanted you to have a better future than I had, but I didn't chase after you, didn't coax you. I never did that. I was used to handling things with reason, with discipline, and this was no different. I believed that being strict was the best way to raise a child. I believed I was right, but that rigidity, over the years, became an invisible, cold wall, pushing my son further and further away. Nathan grew more and more withdrawn. Our conversations were only superficial questions or empty arguments. I knew that distance didn't form overnight. It was built by the nights I stayed at the office, by the times George spent alone with his sick child, by the countless times I said, Mommy's busy, and I didn't realize it until the wall was so high it couldn't be climbed over, so thick that I couldn't hear anyone on the other side. The rain poured down, each heavy drop hitting the car window, mixed with Nathan's choked sobs, making the space thick with sadness. I sat there in my black morning clothes, the umbrella covering half of my face, trying to keep myself from breaking apart. George lay quietly in the coffin, his face cruelly serene. He passed away from a stroke, too quickly, too suddenly, right when Nathan had just turned 25, the age when he needed his father the most to shape his first directions in life. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, but I didn't cry. I didn't allow myself to cry. The pain was so great that if I let it out, I was afraid it would be completely washed away. And like a familiar instinct, I turned to work as if the tight schedules could cover up the gaping hole in my heart. Nathan stood beside me, his shoulders shaking. He leaned against me, seeking comfort. "Mommy, Daddy's gone," he said, his voice broken and hoarse with tears. I squeezed his hand, a clumsy forced movement, then let go quickly. "Don't worry, son. Mommy will be fine. You have to be strong, too." My words were as dry as the cold wind of early winter, lacking warmth, lacking soul, as if I were talking to an assistant, not a son who had just lost his father. I knew I had made Nathan fall away from me once again. He needed a mother to lean on, to cry with. As for me, I could only give him a hard, soulless shield. After the funeral, I threw myself into work like a self-made addict. 70 hours a week. Numbers, meetings, contracts became a surrogate family. The office was no longer a workplace. The smell of strong coffee, the steady tap of the keyboard, the quiet blue light of the screen became my only companions. I worked late into the night on weekends just to keep my mind from having any gaps for grief to creep in. The thick spreadsheets, the hours-long deals, it was all a wall, a cold wall. Nathan didn't give up. He came to the office, called, left a message. "Mom, you look tired. Get some rest." His voice was filled with tender concern. I knew he was trying to reach out, to touch the last bit of me. But I, with my eyes glued to the screen, could only repeat a hollow sentence. "I'm fine. Go home. I have work." I wouldn't let anything, not even emotion, penetrate the armor I'd built to survive. I thought working was about control, about stability, about survival, but I was wrong. Nathan didn't need a mother who could balance the accounts. He needed an embrace, a real look, Then one day, during a regular meeting, a sharp pain shot straight into my chest like a bullet. I was dizzy, my hands shook, my eyes darkened, and I collapsed to the floor. Hospital. Diagnosis: mild myocardial infarction. I was only 55. The doctor's words were like a belated alarm. She needed to stop, needed to rest. I reduced my work hours, but found no meaning outside of work. Even though my body could no longer bear it, I still followed the market, still updated the charts, still followed every fluctuation of the NASDAQ index like a silent prayer. 10 years later, at age 65, I officially retired. A farewell party was held at the most exclusive restaurant in Charlotte. The congratulations flew like fireworks. Fresh flowers, handshakes, souvenir photos. I left with a fat bank account, the reward for a lifetime of dedication. But when the last office door closed behind me, a cold void suddenly closed in, like the darkness of a summer afternoon. Congratulations, Eleanor. Now you can enjoy life. A former colleague patted me on the shoulder, eyes full of excitement. I just smiled, an empty smile. Enjoy? Enjoy what? I turned my head to look at the city through the glass window. Still bustling, still holding my head high with skyscrapers. But I was no longer a part of it. I had devoted my whole life to success, and then when I stood at the top, I suddenly realized there was no one behind me. George was left behind. Nathan had left me with a steadfast silence. And I, Eleanor Whitaker, the woman once known as Hawkeye on the negotiating floor, was now just a lonely old woman in a spacious house with an empty heart and unspeakable regrets. A brilliant career, but a ruined life. That price, I now truly understood, was too high. The pungent smell of oil paint lingered in the air. I picked up my brush and tried to recreate but every stroke I drew was stiff and awkward, lacking the softness and flexibility that art requires. After a few sessions, I gave up. This art was too abstract, too loose for me. No frame, no limits, no rules to stick to. It required emotions, while I no longer knew what to name the emotions inside me. I tried the book club. I sat there, surrounded by smiling faces, silently, trying to join in, trying to find a small ray of light in the pages. They were discussing a romance novel about forgiveness and healing. Suddenly, a soft voice, broken through the air like a thin cut. I wish I could have love like the main character, said a woman a few years younger than me, her voice trembling, her eyes red. She forgave her father who abandoned her. What a magical journey. Another spoke up, his voice filled with memories. I remember my father not coming to my first piano recital because of work. I was angry with him for years. But then I understood he was just a man carrying a burden. Now we're reconciled. Hearing that, my chest ached. An old chill crept into my heart. Nathan's senior recital. I remembered that day clearly. He was on stage, his eyes searching the crowd for me. But I wasn't there. I was at an important meeting, $1 million deal that I couldn't miss. I'd promised to come. Then I broke my word. Regret rose in my throat, a bitter taste I couldn't swallow. I stood up and left the meeting without a word. When I got home, I quickly picked up the phone. I searched for my son. My fingers trembled. The ringing continued for a long time, then went to voicemail. Nathan, I just wanted to check in with you. I hope you and Benjamin are doing well. My voice was hoarse, fading, falling into an endless void. No one answered. The silence was colder than winter. Regret, loneliness. They wrapped around me. Finally, I returned to the only world that made me feel comfortable, where I had control, personal wealth management, stocks, real estate. The numbers moving silently on the screen were the only language I truly understood. I buried myself in market research, trend analysis, reporting, investment decisions. Buy, sell, rotate, track every percentage point of growth. It wasn't because of a desire for wealth or bragging. Money wasn't a desire. Money was a wall, a shield that protected me from the uncertainty that was always lurking out there. In a world where emotions make people fall, I chose money to stand firm. They say money can't buy happiness. That's true. But money can buy security. And for me, security is everything. I repeat it in my head as I place a stock order. The familiar feeling, control, grasp, mastery, returns to my chest like a lingering warmth. I have no home, no familiar arms, but I have money, and in my lonely universe, money is power, my way of being. Day after day repeats itself in an unchanging rhythm. Wake up in the morning, read financial news, follow market fluctuations. Simple lunch. Continue investing and analyzing in the afternoon. Read books at night, sometimes watch economic programs. The life of a wealthy retiree, but there is no joy left. The house is large, fully equipped, but quiet like an empty box. George's hoarse laughter has become a distant memory. Nathan's chirping footsteps as a child are also just a memory. There is only me and the numbers. Perhaps this is the price to pay for a life that has put all its heart into a career, forgetting to nurture the soul. I have built an empire, but lost myself in the endless race, and now I am trying to find the meaning of life, while all doors are closed, except the door of wealth. The wedding music sounded as gentle as a breeze, but to my ears, it was like a farewell. I sat in the third row, silently watching Nathan, my son, standing opposite Clara, a beautiful interior designer, full of light in her pure white wedding dress. The two young people's perfect smiles made my heart ache. I had imagined this day in my dreams, a day when I would be by my son's side, picking up every detail of the ceremony, holding his hand and giving him my blessing. But the reality was cruel. I, the groom's biological mother, was like an outsider, present more out of politeness than love, sidelined in the most sacred moment of my son's life. Miss Eleanor, would you like some more champagne? A young waiter smiled, his voice polite, his eyes indifferent, as if he were talking to nothing. I shook my head, a small gesture but full of rejection. How could I clink glasses to celebrate when inside me was a heavy depression? I felt marginalized, isolated, in the very world I had spent my life building. When Benjamin was born, a glimmer of hope flashed through me. A grandson, a second chance to make amends, to love and be loved back unconditionally. I devoted myself to choosing expensive toys, the most exquisite clothes, hoping to make up for everything Nathan had ever lacked. But Clara, that beautiful daughter-in-law, was a cold fortress. She always built an invisible distance, blocking me out with her skillful courtesy. "Hello, Mother. Benjamin is sleeping. You can see him through the glass," Clara said, her voice light but her eyes set a boundary. I stood still, looking through the cold glass at my little nephew sleeping soundly in the cradle. His face was rosy and immature, like a lotus bud blooming in winter. A warmth passed through me, fragile and short-lived. But Clara was always delicate and decisive. I was only allowed to visit a couple of times, always under a meaningful, watchful gaze. Even the gifts I brought, like the puzzle I had spent so much time researching, were frowned upon as too complicated. "But Clara, it will help stimulate his thinking," I said, but my voice trembled, lost in her firmness. I believed I was sharing valuable experience, that of someone who had succeeded in the demanding field of finance, where logical thinking was a prerequisite for survival. "I know, Mom, but Benjamin likes simpler things, like teddy bears," Clara interrupted, her eyes cold. "You love him, I know that, but the way you approach it is a little different from how we want to raise our own children. Benjamin needs to be himself, to explore freely, not be a miniature copy of you." Her soft voice was a thin knife, stabbing deep into the soft flesh of my heart. She didn't want me to make the same mistake with my son. Clara feared I would turn Benjamin into another Eleanor, rigid, taciturn, and calculating. Nathan, now a successful software engineer, had built his own career. He had a stable job, a stable home, a secure future. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt the vast distance between us. Nathan had never received any financial support from me. "Mom, I appreciate your concern, but I want to be independent. I don't want to rely on anyone," Nathan said when I offered him a new house. "I've seen you work hard for everything. I want to do it myself." Those words, though laden with respect, cut like a knife. I was rejected, rejected again. An empire I'd built with my blood, a fortune I'd worked so hard to accumulate, were now just a waste of time for the person I loved most. Nathan didn't need my money, didn't need my support, and probably didn't need my love, at least not in the way I knew how to express it. They think I crave control, but I know I crave love. I said it silently, fighting back the tears that welled up in my eyes. I used to believe that material things could fill the void. that success could be my way of making it up to my son. But perhaps all Nathan needed was a hug, a word of comfort, a mother who was there at the right time, and I couldn't do that. There was a gap between Nathan and me that grew wider and wider, like two planets far apart, no longer in the same orbit. I was a stranger in the home I had once cherished, a grandmother who had been cut out of her grandson's life. And that pain, dull, rooted, cold, was more terrifying than any physical pain I had ever known. It was a sultry August afternoon, and the air in Charlotte felt thick with every breath. I was allowed to visit Benjamin again, a rare privilege I had longed for. Nathan and Clara's living room was filled with children's toys, giant teddy bears, brightly colored building blocks. But in the midst of that seemingly vibrant space, I felt a quiet chill. Ellie, I told you, Benjamin doesn't like complicated construction toys like that. He's too young, Clara said, her arms crossed, her voice sweet but not without a layer of disappointment. I looked at the box of Legos I had carefully selected, a brainy toy that I believed would stimulate his thinking and imagination. Now it lay quietly on the table, a silent accusation that I didn't understand children. I just wanted to give Benjamin something of value beyond the material, a gift that would nurture his future. But Clara, it helps develop the brain, I said softly, but the words broke off amidst her hard waves. I understand that, but he likes simpler things, like teddy bears, she said, her eyes flashing with determination. Benjamin needs age-appropriate play. Don't put too many expectations on him. Once again, Clara reminded me of parenting, a distant, disheartening reminder. I still remember clearly one time. I brought Clara a book on early education methods, a book I had studied and liked. Clara, I think this book is very good. It can help you orient Benjamin in the future, I said, placing the book on the coffee table with a small hope. She looked at the book, then turned to me, her eyes filled with caution. Mother Eleanor, thank you, but we have our own way of raising children. I don't want Benjamin to be pressured from a young age. She gently took the book, put it in the deep corner of the shelf, as if shelving something unexpected. A gentle but decisive refusal, a touch to my self-esteem that made me ache. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes suddenly unguarded as she turned to me. Eleanor, she said, her voice surprisingly soft, I know you want the best for me. But you know, I grew up in a very strict family. I always had to be at the top of my class. I had to do everything right. I was never allowed to be myself, never allowed to make mistakes. And I don't want Benjamin to live like that. I want him to be free to explore, to be happy on his own terms, without the weight of invisible expectations. Those heartfelt words left me speechless. I looked at Clara, then at the simple landscape on the wall, Benjamin's own drawing. Clara, too, had been a bullied child, and now she feared I would do the same to her son. A belated understanding crept into my mind. Perhaps Clara's reactions were not just resistance, but also a vague fear rooted in an unhealed past. Just once, when Benjamin was 3 years old, Nathan and Clara were busy and left him with me for a day. Just one day, like a faint ray of light piercing through the clouds of distance. The house seemed to come alive. Benjamin's laughter echoed in every corner, lighting up memories that seemed tarnished. Grandma, I lost! Benjamin exclaimed, his voice clear and childlike as I won a game of children's chess. His big eyes sparkled with admiration, a pure and simple beauty. I smiled. It's okay, Benjamin. Chess is a game of strategy. We'll learn together. Every game is a new lesson. I looked into those bright eyes, clearly feeling a primal connection beyond all barriers. A warm feeling spread in my chest, the feeling I had been craving for so long, unconditional love. We continued to play, laughing together, and in that moment I forgot all my worries, all my loneliness. I was just a grandmother, happy with the moment with my grandson. But like all good moments, it passed. Clara returned. The key clicked in the lock, the door opened, and the air in the room suddenly became heavy. Mother, it's time for Benjamin to go to bed, Clara said, her voice cold. Her eyes swept over Benjamin and me as if we were just two fleeting figures. From that day on, the times Clara always had an excuse. Benjamin was sick, busy, studying extra. Once again, I was pushed to the outside of the family circle. I understood. Clara was afraid of my strictness, afraid that I would pass on dry values to Benjamin, turning him into another copy of me, cold, rigid, lonely. Perhaps she was not wrong, but what I wanted was simply to give him a solid foundation, what I had spent my whole life learning with blood and tears. However, all doors were closed, and I, like a bystander, silently witnessed the life of my son and grandson passing by, without any right to intervene. The phone rang, breaking the frozen silence of the July afternoon in 2025. I looked at the screen, Nathan's number. My heart sank. Since George's death, every call. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, tried to put some warmth into my voice, a warmth that I knew had been absent from our conversations for too long. Hi, Nathan. It's Mom, I said softly, but my heart was like a lake rippling under a stormy sky. There was a sigh on the other end of the line, long and heavy, as if it carried years of unspoken words. Mom, I'm calling because of Benjamin's birthday. Nathan's voice was dry and cold, as if I were a stranger interrupting a conversation that wasn't meant for me. Remember, it's almost here, I said, trying to sound casual, but the question came out like a confession. There was a pause. My heart clenched. I knew. I had forgotten. I'd missed so many moments with Nathan, and now I was doing it again with Benjamin. Mom, I'm sorry, Nathan said, slowly and hesitantly, but his tone left no room for hope. We're having a party that's unneeded. Once again, I was excluded from that warm circle, the circle of love, where I was supposed to belong. No need, I repeated, my voice rising, unable to hide the hurt that was welling up inside me. Nathan, I am his grandmother. Do you know how much I have longed for this day? Nathan's voice suddenly sharpened, like a knife sharpened by years of pent-up anger. You're always criticizing, always saying the way we raised Benjamin was wrong. He paused, then continued, each word pouring out a long suppressed anger. Do you remember how you reacted when I said I wanted to learn to draw? You called it useless. When I wanted to quit my banking job to pursue technology, you called me a dreamer. You said I didn't know the value of money. I was silent, my heart. And now you want to raise Benjamin the way you want me to? Nathan's voice broke, bitter. I want my son to be free, not to live with the pressure, the expectations you put on me. I want to protect him from the dryness, the coldness I grew up with. I choked. The accusations, though harsh, carried an undeniable truth. I had thought I was loving, but in my child's eyes, I was probably just a harsh shadow, always demanding, always lacking in tenderness. I just want what's best for him, I whispered weakly. Don't you think we're spoiling him? I just want Benjamin to have a solid foundation. I don't want him to have to struggle like I did. Enough, Nathan shouted. I don't want you to influence Benjamin. I don't want you to put your own ideas into his head. You have to understand. We want to limit the contact between you and him. I stood there, motionless. The phone fell from my hand, hitting the wooden table with a dry sound. I hadn't cried when George died. I hadn't cried when Nathan left home all those years ago. But this time, the tears fell like silent rain in the middle of a winter night, unstoppable, untraceable, limited contact, because I was too strict, because I thought love could be wrapped in discipline. But I was wrong, And that mistake now is a lifelong punishment. I shuffled to the fireplace. On the wooden shelf, an old family photo blurred with time. Me, George, and little Nathan. Eyes shining, hands clasped in our parents, happiness unbroken by life. I had sworn to protect him from what I had known: poverty, helplessness, fear. But I had forgotten what mattered most: presence, listening, tenderness. Now I have it all: a prestigious career, a fortune, but nothing to call family. All that remains is a photograph, a dying fire, and a regret that will haunt me until my last days. Margaret Stone's law office smelled of yellowed paper and worn leather, a quiet scent of time, of sealed secrets, of a stoicism as enduring as she was. Mixed in was a faint scent of coffee, quiet and subtle, like a whisper of the past. I sat across from her, her face still impassive, but in her eyes there was a cold steel, resolute and quiet. The phone call with Nathan was like a final wake-up call from my delusions. It was time to act, no longer to control, but to make amends, in the only way I could. So, Eleanor, are you absolutely sure about this? An $800,000 education trust to be used only when Benjamin turns 18? Margaret asked, her voice still professional, slow and careful. For 3 decades, she had been my confidant, from million-dollar contracts to complicated wills. She knew who I was, knew my resilience. But today, she might have noticed something different in those eyes, a crack that wouldn't heal. I nodded, my heart suddenly tightening, and took a deep breath. I'm sure, Margaret. This is the last thing I can do for him. I want him to have a secure future, a future that no one can interfere with, especially financially. There was a bitterness in my voice that was hard to hide. I didn't want Benjamin to go through the financial struggles, the torments and pressures that I had endured. I wanted him to be free, to choose his own life without the constraints of calculations or expectations. I pulled a thick, off-white, carefully sealed envelope from my pocket and handed it across the table. Here's the letter. When Benjamin turns 18, give it to him along with the trust documents. I don't want Nathan to know about this. I'm afraid he'll get the wrong idea. He'll think I'm trying to buy his affections or secretly trying to manipulate Benjamin's future. My voice shook, strained between fear and hope. The truth was that I was afraid Nathan would say no, afraid he'd see this as another ploy, another disguised attempt at manipulation, as he'd thought of me all these years. Margaret stared at the letter, then looked up at me. For a moment, her eyes flashed with sympathy, quiet and reserved, before returning to her usual professional composure. She knew the brokenness of my family, the toughness that had helped me build everything, but also the price of so much unspoken love. She had seen me climb to the top with nothing, and now she saw me quietly leave something behind, even if it would never be understood. Is there anything you would like me to note in the will, Eleanor? Margaret asked, choosing each word with her usual care. I shook my head, my eyes softening but my voice firm. No, this fund is all I want to leave Benjamin. As for Nathan, he already has everything he needs. Those words, while seemingly light, contained an unnamed. He had his own happiness, and he had rejected the love I had tried to give him. Now I let go, no longer trying to change anyone, no longer holding out hope for things that could not be reversed. I chose to remain silent, to step back. The room fell silent. Margaret nodded slightly. She understood, not in words, but in the silence of someone who had seen too many lives shattered within these four walls. I decided, a secret, a gift, and maybe a silent message for the years of denial, for the emotional scars that never healed. This was not revenge, nor was it revenge, just an admission. that I had failed to win my son's love, but I still had a chance to love my nephew in my own way, not loudly, not forced, but deeply enough to last through the years. I left Margaret Stone's office and stepped out into the bright Charlotte summer sun. My heart felt heavy, but also strangely light. I had let go of the heaviest burden of all, the burden of control. And instead, I placed a fragile trust in Benjamin's future. Whether Nathan would ever understand or not, I knew I had done the right thing. This was how I showed love quietly, steadily, and finally, freely. The strong smell of antiseptic filled Dr. Rachel Carter's cold office, a quiet and soulless scent, as if time had stopped here. The white light from the ceiling shone down mercilessly, exposing every gloomy corner of the room that was already too indifferent. I sat silently on the examination chair, my hands tightly gripping the worn edges of the leather, feeling the dry cracks that carved deep into my trembling palms. A premonition of something bad had quietly crept into my heart from the moment I stepped in. And when I saw Dr. Carter, the usually warm and caring woman, now wearing an unusually serious expression, I knew the storm was coming. The door opened softly. Dr. Carter walked in, holding a thin, silent file. She sat down opposite me, her eyes fixed on me, not avoiding me, but with concern. I took a deep breath, the sharp, sterile air filling my chest, trying to steady myself in the moment that could change everything. I was used to fate's blows. I had lived long enough to know that no pain was too unexpected. I have the test results, Eleanor, the doctor said, his voice as deep as a fatal knock on the last door. I nodded. Go ahead, doctor. I can handle it. My voice was steady, like someone who had learned to accept loss. In my 76 years, I had never let anyone else decide how I felt, and I wasn't going to start today. Dr. Carter sighed, a heavy sigh as if she were carrying the weight of the world. She has terminal liver cancer. We estimate she has 8 to 12 months left. 8 to 12 months. That's all there is left to live a life that was once endless, a life that built an empire, overcame unspeakable losses, stood at the top, now all together. It's just a few short numbers. I turned my face toward the window. The weak afternoon sunlight seeped through the gaps in the curtains like the last breaths of a dying dream. Outside, the world was still spinning. People were still living, still loving, still hating, and I was about to step out of it, silently. We could start chemotherapy, the doctor continued, her voice now soft as an apologetic lullaby. But the side effects will be severe. You will be tired, depleted, and your quality of life will be significantly reduced. I interrupted her. No, I don't want chemotherapy. My voice was clear like an oath. I didn't want to drag out my last days in pain and misery. I had controlled my life from beginning to end, and now I would control my death in the way I chose. She nodded, quiet understanding in her eyes. Do you want to talk to your family? The image of the recent phone call, his cold and angry voice, his eyes full of resentment. I shook my head. No, I don't want Nathan to know. I don't want my son to come to me out of guilt. I don't want to use illness to hold on to something that has long been broken. If I leave, I want to do it quietly, with dignity. And so I thought. But as I walked out of the examination room, a sudden wave of dizziness came over me. My vision went black. Everything spun as the storm finally swept me away. I clung to the cold wall, but the dizziness did not let up. Then I heard the nurse's panicked voice, and then just an endless void. When I opened my eyes, the stinging white light returned. The smell of antiseptic was still there, cold as a gatekeeper between life and death. But this time, there was a familiar face by the bedside. Nathan. My son sat there, his eyes sunken with worry. In his hand was the familiar orange pill case, the one the doctor had prescribed me the day before. His eyes stared at me, both angry and frightened, as if the man was witnessing a part of his childhood lost in an undeniable truth. Mom, what's wrong? I just got a call. They said you fainted. And then Dr. Carter. She called me. You have terminal cancer? Nathan's voice was hoarse, almost breaking into pieces. I turned away, not daring to look into her eyes. I don't want you to worry. I don't want you to suffer. Don't want me to know, he roared, standing up. You're always like that, always keeping everything to yourself, always acting like you don't need anyone. What do you think I am, a stranger? I wanted to say something, but a sudden sharp pain in my stomach interrupted my train of thought. I bent over, holding my stomach with both hands, my whole body cold. Sweat ran down my forehead. Mom! Nathan rushed forward, panicked. Where are you hurt? What do you need? Don't scare me. His voice broke and a tear rolled down his cheek, the first I'd seen since he lost his father. The nurse rushed in, then the doctor. Nathan was pushed away, but he stood there, motionless, his eyes filled with an unnamed pain. I looked at him, then closed my eyes, letting the pain take me away, where everything, love, anger, regret, was just a distant echo. I was no longer afraid of death. But I was afraid of missing the chance to hold my child one last time with the love I had never spoken. The familiar clink of the mailbox rang out in the quiet morning, like a bell waking me from my wandering thoughts. I stepped out onto the porch, where the gentle morning sunlight of a new autumn day filtered through the foliage, drawing pale streaks of light on the damp ground. In the old iron box, a blue card appeared, decorated with floating balloons, bright and innocent like childhood. I squinted to read the neat handwriting. Happy 8th birthday, Benjamin. Looking forward to welcoming Eleanor. Signed, Nathan and Clara. A cold feeling rose in my chest. An invitation? After everything that had happened? After the tense phone call, after Nathan had found out I was sick and had reacted like a total stranger, cold, angry, judgmental, he had told me I was not needed anymore, that he wanted to limit all contact between me and Benjamin. And now the card had arrived. Neat, but lifeless, like a social obligation. I knew this was not altruism. This was not forgiveness. This was Nathan's way of keeping the family normal in the eyes of others. Or maybe Clara had forced him to do it, as always, with a gentle but determined face. But whatever the reason, I was going. I had to go. Because this could be the last time I see Benjamin. With Dr. Carter's diagnosis, I have no illusions about time. 8 to 12 months. Each day passes like the last grains of sand in a cracked glass clock. I no longer care about the prying eyes or harsh comments from Nathan and Clara. All I want is to be with my little nephew, to keep his image in the deepest part of my mind, where the disease cannot reach. I want to live every brief moment with him, with all my love, no matter how quiet. I walked into the living room, my eyes scanning the familiar objects. What to give him? A simple gift, nothing too expensive, nothing that would make Clara frown as too much or age inappropriate. I didn't want to add any more reasons for criticism, didn't want to inflame any simmering tensions. My eyes stopped at the wooden bookshelf in the corner, a place where the past and memories quietly gathered dust. On it, among the dry books on economics and finance, were a few old volumes of science and astronomy that George had bought for Nathan when he was a child. Science, I smiled. Benjamin was smart. He had bright eyes and I remembered the last time I saw him, how he listened eagerly to my stories about constellations, about the vastness of the universe. He was quiet, but his eyes were bright. I knew he would love that. I picked up a hardcover, full color book about the solar system with vivid illustrations of planets, galaxies, comets, a vast and wonderful world where imaginations could run wild and where Benjamin could dream without limits. Clara wouldn't complain. I was sure of it. I wrapped the book carefully, without much fuss. Just plain brown paper and a little blue ribbon. I would not talk about the disease, not a word. This was my own battle, and I chose to keep it to myself. I did not want pitying eyes, did not want the burden of duty to fall on Nathan. If this was my last journey, I would walk it on my own 2 feet, with the serenity I had. On Benjamin's birthday, I will come, with that small gift, with a sincere smile, and a heart full of love without words. I will cherish every moment, every look, every hug, every smile from him. I will not seek reconciliation, nor will I dig up the past with Nathan or Clara. I do not need apologies. I do not need acceptance. I just need to be present, silently, but truly. I just need to see Benjamin grow another year older, to see him happy. That is all I wish for now. A little peace, a sliver of light before the night closes. And if there is anything I want to leave behind, it is the silent but true presence of a grandmother, loving her grandchild, whether anyone believes it or not. The scratching of pen on paper was the only sound that broke the silence of the evening. The pale yellow light from the desk lamp illuminated the careful handwriting I was writing. I sat there in my familiar office, surrounded by financial books and piles of files. But today, my mind was not on numbers or contracts. I was finishing a letter to Benjamin. My dear Benjamin, when you read this letter, you will be an 18-year-old man. I hope life will smile upon you, that you will find your passion and pursue it to the end. I created this fund so that you can pursue your dreams without being constrained by financial worries. But most of all, I want you to know that I love you, and I love your father, Nathan, even though I did not show it properly. I made mistakes. I let work take over our family. If you get the chance, tell your father I am sorry. Live your life to the fullest, Benjamin, not just for me, but for you. I paused, took a deep breath. Every sentence, every word, I had carefully considered. I wanted Benjamin to understand, wanted him to know that my love for him was real, even though I couldn't easily show it. I wanted him to know that I cared, that I was watching his every move, even if I had to stand far away. This wasn't just a financial gift. It was a message from the bottom of my heart. Next to the letter, I placed a few old family photos. One of George and I, young and radiant, holding hands on our wedding day, happy smiles on our faces. One of Nathan as a little boy, maybe 3 or 4, grinning at a new toy car, his eyes wide and innocent. And one of Benjamin on that rare visit, his eyes wide and innocent, sitting on the floor playing children's chess with me. It was one of the few moments when I felt a real connection with my nephew. I looked at the pictures, memories flooding back like a slow-motion film. George, the man who had always supported me, who had loved me unconditionally, who had filled the voids I had unintentionally created. Nathan, my only son, who had endured my strictness, dryness, and then distance, my mistakes. I had been too strict, too focused on work, I had thought that by providing a material life, I could make up for my emotional deprivation. I was wrong. I was wrong. I missed out on so many things. I hurt Nathan, but my love for Nathan, for Benjamin, was real. There was nothing to regret about that. I told myself, a tear rolling down my cheek. I hadn't cried when I learned I had a terminal illness, but now these memories softened my heart. I didn't regret the decisions that led me to success, but I did regret the price I paid for that success. I folded the letter and carefully placed it in the envelope with the photos. Tomorrow morning, I would deliver it to Margaret Stone. This letter and the education fund were all I could do to heal, to explain, to hope. A faint hope that Benjamin would understand my feelings, even if Nathan never would. I didn't have much time left, that was certain, and I wanted to die with peace, knowing that I had tried to do the best I could for the people I loved, in my own way. This is not a bribe. This is a legacy of love, of regret, and of a little quiet revenge for the pain I felt being cut out of my own son's life. A revenge not of harm, but of forgiveness and protection. I will not let the distance between Nathan and I affect Benjamin. I will make sure he has a bright future, even if I can't be there to see it. The sweet scent of hydrangeas wafted in the wind, the white and pink petals gently swaying. I sat on a stone bench in my garden, watching the red sunset slowly sinking into the horizon. That red color, once again, reminded me of the scars in my life, the pain that had been deeply engraved in my seemingly callous heart. I thought about the mistakes, the pain, the loss. About George, the man who gave me everything and was gone too soon. About Nathan, my son, whom I loved in my own way, but had pushed away. About Benjamin, my little nephew, the last light in my life. About the education fund I set up for him and the letter I wrote. Did Benjamin really understand? Did he know how much I loved him, even if I didn't show it easily? Would Nathan ever understand what I did? Or would he forever see it as manipulation? The questions kept going through my mind, endlessly, unanswered. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence of the garden. I was surprised. Who would be coming at this hour? I walked to the door and looked through the glass. Nathan. He was standing there alone, his face tense. Nathan? I asked, my voice surprised. He looked at me, his eyes uncertain. Mom, I came to talk about Benjamin and about everything. He hesitated, then continued. I found your prescription in your coat pocket when you were at the hospital the other day. Dr. Carter called me when he saw me coming to see you. I know. My heart sank. He knew. My secret had been discovered. I looked at Nathan, trying to hide my shock. Come in, I said, my voice dry. We sat down. Nathan looked at me, his eyes complicated, angry, worried, and sad. Why didn't you tell me? Why do you always hide things? I sighed and told him everything about the diagnosis, about the decision not to have chemotherapy, about my desire to die with dignity. I also told him about Benjamin's education fund and the letter I'd written. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, Nathan. I don't want you to think I'm using my illness to hold you back. I I just want you to be happy. Nathan listened, silent. When I finished, he stood up and walked over to me. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around me. It was an awkward hug at first, but then he tightened his grip. I felt the warmth of my son, a feeling I had longed for so long. Tears welled up in my eyes again, not from pain this time, but from relief, from the unexpected gift of affection. Mom, I'm sorry, Nathan whispered, his voice shaking. I was so angry with you, so focused on your mistakes, that I didn't see what you were going through. I know you tried your best. I I won't leave you alone. I shook my head slightly, pulling out of his arms. No need, son. I did everything I needed to do. I had everything ready. I just want you to know, I love you, Nathan, so much. I had wanted to say those words for so long, but never had the courage. And now, as death approached, I could say them. Nathan looked at me, his eyes full of understanding and a little regret. He hadn't completely forgiven, I knew, but he understood. That was enough. Nathan stayed with me until the last of the sunset. We didn't say much, just sat there, in the silence of the evening, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the dark sky. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning, an acceptance, a small glimmer of hope for a future I couldn't see, but I believed would include Benjamin's happiness and perhaps Nathan's peace. Before he left, Nathan gently placed something on the table next to my chair. It was a slightly crumpled crayon drawing of a house with a bright red roof and a silver-haired woman standing next to a little boy. Underneath it was scrawled, "Grandma, I love you, Benjamin." Attached to it was a small piece of paper in Nathan's handwriting. "Benjamin asked me to give it to you. He said he misses you." I looked at the picture, then at the paper. A hot tear rolled down my cheek onto the picture, smearing some of the crayon. I held the picture close to my heart. It was the most precious gift I had ever received, a gift of unconditional love. It brought me great comfort, knowing that no matter what, Benjamin loved me, and that, more than anything else, brought me peace. I stood up and walked slowly towards the house, my feet heavy but my heart strangely calm. My shadow, the last rays of the sunset of the day fell, dyeing the hydrangea garden pink. I felt a sense of relief. My life, despite its regrets, despite its cracks, had finally found peace, and that was the most important.